What's up everyone, TJ here on behalf of Mako Sports, and today I'll be doing my long-awaited review of the Sony PXW Z90. So I pre-ordered this camera in December of 2017, I believe, so I've had this for, well, at the time of making this video, about a year and a half. And from the get-go, when this was first announced, I knew that I was definitely gonna pick this up. So starting with the body, the lens grouping up here is mostly metal, and then the central part of the camera is also metal. And really everything else is plastic, so the LCD screen, the part where your hand holds onto the camera, and the top handle, lens hood, everything like that, everything else is really plastic, all bought a really strong plastic. On the inside of the camera, we have a 3.5mm LCD screen, which is pretty large. It's larger than most mirrorless cameras, which is nice. It makes focusing manually a lot easier. Also, we have a built-in EVF, which tilts up 45 degrees, which is always nice when you're operating like on a tripod or something like that. So the EVF isn't the highest resolution. It's about the same as the Sony A7 III, but it is very bright and easy to see outdoors, which is important. The handle up top is removable via these two screws underneath. And also with that same handle, we have a shotgun mic holder, as well as we got our Pro audio controls over here. And then under that mic holder, we have our two XLR inputs. So talking about the lens, it is operating on a 1-inch sensor, so it's a little bit smaller than Micro Four Thirds. Really what that allows is for you to have a slightly longer zoom range while keeping the size down. So it's a 29 to around 350mm lens. On the wide end, it goes from f2.8, and on the tele end, it goes to f4. So if you want to just stop it down to f4, you can have essentially an f4 constant 29 to 350mm lens, which is really nice. Now the lens is super sharp, as well as since it has that smaller sensor on the inside, it allows you to get a really nice close focusing distance, surprisingly close, essentially near touching the lens, which is amazing if you do like product videos and that sort of thing. Now one caveat with that is that the lens is also focused by wire, so of course rack focusing, it's pretty tough and essentially impossible with this. So actually I was very impressed with the image quality from this camera. It is a very small camera, but it definitely has a really nice looking image. The color science has been improved from previous Sony cameras in the past. It is more in line with the more current generation of Sony cameras like the A6400, the A7 III, and the A7R III, so it's a lot more natural looking. Skin tones look a lot better as well. And depending upon which picture profile you choose, you can get some really nice dynamic range when you're shooting. Furthermore, the Z90 uses the XAVCL codec just like the FS5, so image quality is pretty good. 1080p is going to be a 10-bit 422, which is awesome. 4K is only 8-bit 420. However, the 4K is super sharp, and I was surprised that the 1080p detail is also really nice as well. So stepping into pros, the overall camera is a really nice small package. I'd say it's a similar size and weight to like a Sony A7 III with the 24-105 with the XLR K2M on the top, so it's a similar weight and size to that. Also, it makes traveling with this really easy. You don't have to worry about bringing on any extra lenses or anything like that, so you can really just grab and go with this camera, which I think is really what it was meant for. And also being kind of more of a run and gun oriented camera, the startup on the camera is really quick, so you see you just open the LCD screen like that and it's already on. So like I mentioned earlier, we do have two XLR inputs on the top handle, as well as professional audio controls for, any sort of microphone that you'd be running into the camera. Of course, it does have 40 volts phantom power, so I know a lot of shotgun microphones don't have a power source, so that way you can power it from the camera. No issues there. Another pro grade feature that might be a little bit hard to see, but down here we do have 3 sets of ND. I believe it's 2, 4, and 6 stops, so that's plenty for any sort of daytime exterior shots that you'd be using. Autofocus on this camera is absolutely unbelievable. It's right up there with the top of the line Sony cameras, as well as the Canon cameras. So like 1DX Mark II, A7 III, A6400. Really impressive autofocus. There are a ton of different options that you can customize for the specific autofocus in the camera. Now, because there's so many options, like a lot of Sony cameras, it can be a little bit confusing to configure. But the manual that comes with the camera does state a couple of recommendations that you can follow as well. So essentially you can choose to be like really fast and snappy, or to be smooth and steady like a Hollywood AC type shot. Now I don't shoot a lot of 1080 standard motion or 1080 like 24 FPS, 30 FPS. I mostly do, when I'm shooting 1080, it's mostly the slow motion. So the slow motion is 120 frames per second, continuous, and that is in 10-bit 422, which is amazing. You can really push and pull that image in post, which is something that I come to really appreciate. So this camera, you have the full slew of picture profiles, which is really nice to see. So with that, you have like Cine 1, 2, 3, and 4, HLG 1, 2, and 3, as well as slot 2 and 3. And also you do have the kind of standard punchy Rec 7.9 picture profiles that you can use for like really quick turnaround time projects. Also on the inside, which is always a nice feature, we do have 2 SD card slots in here, so you can do like your relay recording, so it's recording the exact same file onto both parts, so you have like that safety backup. You can also do cascade recording, so it'll fill up one card, then go on to the next one. And also this camera does allow a feature which is proxy recording, which is nice. So say on one card, it'll record like your higher resolution 4K files, and then also it'll make like a low resolution 720p proxy that you can use for editing. So that's also really nice to see. So stepping into cons, particularly my biggest con with this camera was low light performance. I thought it would be a little bit better. I know Sony definitely hyped up, having the larger 1-inch sensor that you'd probably get better low light performance than say a 2/3 inch broadcast sensor. That's definitely not the case. Low light definitely struggles, or this camera definitely struggles in low light, which is something that I was really disappointed in. So usability wise, I believe I can push it up to around 15 dB of gain, and I'm starting to get really noisy past that. 12 is really where I'd like to stay and not go above though. If you prefer to use ISO, which I would not recommend, I believe that's somewhere around 2500 where it starts to get a little nasty. So this camera ships with the Sony FE70 battery, which is pretty small. It's nice because it doesn't weigh a lot, but at the opposite end, it doesn't hold a charge for very long, so you'd expect to get around 2 to 2.5 hours of 4K recording with this, maybe a little bit more if you're doing 1080 type stuff. Also, the image stabilizer in this camera is pretty basic. It's just like a standard image stabilization. There's an active mode which crops in on the sensor a little bit as well. That also works really well. However, there is no IBIS in this camera. I think IBIS would have been a great implementation, especially with a smaller sensor. Would have probably gotten gimbal-like results in this, but unfortunately, you only have lens stabilization with this camera. So who is this camera for? So for me specifically, I am a sports videographer, so a lot of times what I have to do is I'm shooting action on one end of the field, so around 200 to 300 millimeters focal length wise, but then I have to quickly go to something a lot wider, like a 35, so when I'm getting a huddle shot. And with mirrorless cameras, it's kind of iffy with that, so a lot of times you might have to switch lenses, which of course in sports you don't really have enough time to switch lenses. So what this allowed me to do is kind of go from that super wide end to that super tele end in just mere seconds, no changing in lenses, anything like that. If you're a broadcast professional, of course, and you're looking for like a smaller camera, this does have 10-bit, so it'll work for you in that case. It also has a SDI port, which is also important. So for broadcast professionals, I definitely recommend it if you're looking for that smaller camera. Be a good camera for schools looking at purchasing a camera, because it is pretty easy to learn on. So if your school has like a broadcasting program, this is definitely a camera I'd recommend looking into. If you're a student and you can actually afford this, I know $3,000 is pretty steep for most college students, but it is a great camera for students. It's really easy to use, power up and everything like that. And just in general, if you shoot like any documentaries or run and gun type shooting where you have to be really quick with your stuff, get some really quick shots, that sort of thing, this camera really excels in that kind of space. And also where I think this camera comes in to help a lot is if you're a Sony shooter just in general, and say you own like an A7 III or an A6500, A6400, something like that, and you want to just have another camera on the side as a B camera, or something that for when you don't want to spend time changing lenses, that sort of thing, you just want to get something that can get a shot super quickly, I think this camera will complement one of those larger sensor alpha cameras really, really well. Of course, by staying in the Sony ecosystem, you get the same or a similar image quality and similar color science, that sort of thing. So matching in post is really simple. So who is the camera not for? So if you do a ton of low light stuff, like if you're an A7S II user or an A7 III user and you're shooting in like moonlight and that sort of thing a whole bunch, this camera is definitely not for you. If you need a hybrid camera, of course, like stills and videos, which is very popular nowadays, this camera is also not going to be for you. You're going to look into something like an A7 III or an A6400. It's going to serve you a lot better there because this camera can't do any sort of stills work. And if you're just like a sucker for that super shallow depth of field full frame look, this camera really isn't going to give you that. So with that 1-inch sensor, it's a little bit smaller, and that f4 aperture, you're really just going to struggle to kind of get that super shallow depth of field look. You can definitely get some depth of field, and I'd say a quote unquote respectable depth of field where You can get a little bit of compression, but don't expect like 135mm f2 on an A7 III. Don't expect anything like that from this type of camera. So that's it for my Sony PXW Z90 review. I absolutely love this camera and it brings a lot to the table. So with that, if you guys enjoyed the video or found it helpful, be sure to give it a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and thank you for watching.